አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ
Good evening all, and thank you for joining us. This is Adebabay Media's Viewer Digest program. Today we have invited a Democratic candidate to come and talk to us why we should vote for her and issues that she's going to be bringing up, especially with the midterm elections coming up right around the corner, and where we get to vote or unvote every single seat in the House of Representatives. I'd like to invite everyone to share and like this conversation with your friends and family and to stay with us. Thank you for being here.
Adebabay Media yene now. Adebabay Media yene now.
Adebabay Media yene now.
Adebabay Media የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch Adebabay Media?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
Welcome back. As I have tried to mention a bit earlier, midterm elections are right around the corner. But before then, we're going to have to vote for who is going to be on the ballots on November, and the primary votes will be starting around November, and we want to be looking at the different candidates we have in our own districts to be able to see who aligns with our views and beliefs. And today I have invited a guest who is running for a district in Virginia. Ethiopians and Eritrean Americans tend to live in the majority of that. And right now, especially with what's going on in Ethiopia and Eritrea, we have learned that it is very important and necessary for us to be involved in the local elections within our communities. My guest is Victoria, and thank you for Victoria for being here with us today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for being here. I guess before we start our conversation about policies and what you stand for, could you tell us a bit about who you are?
Sure. So my name is Victoria Virasingh. I was born and raised here in Northern Virginia in Arlington. I'm the daughter of two immigrants. My mom is from Ecuador in South America, and my father is the son of Punjabi Sikh refugees who was born and raised in Bangkok, Thailand. And they came here to Arlington, to Virginia, in hopes of finding a better life. And they got married, they had me. We grew up here, and I think my story is a story that so many immigrants and first generation Americans go through. My parents worked really hard. They worked minimum wage jobs, just to get by. I was the first in my family to go to college. I got a full ride scholarship to go to Stanford and started working after getting my master's degree, started working in the technology industry. And before coming home here to Northern Virginia and getting involved in politics and local community work and nonprofit work.
What are the values you grew up with?
So I think growing up in an immigrant working class family, so many of the values is working hard, taking advantage of any and every opportunity that comes your way. I'm a daughter of faith. I grew up in the church. That was fundamental, to my upbringing, to teach me the values of the church, of faith, of charity, of humility, of helping others. And I think that that's something that bonds so many of us. I mean, growing up in Northern Virginia, I grew up alongside the Ethiopian and Eritrean community because all of us were a melting pot. There are more than 100 languages spoken in Virginia's 8th district, the district that I'm running in. And those experiences of our communities are very similar. And I think that, we came here, my family came here in hopes of finding a better life, in hopes that me, their daughter, would be able to go to college and become a professional and start working. And the reason why I'm running is because I'm seeing that that's harder and harder to do. The American dream, which is our dream, is becoming harder and harder for us to reach. What are we doing to secure a future for the next generation that is better than the one that we have now? What are we doing to make sure in all these areas of the economy, housing, healthcare, education, that we're really leveling out the playing field and giving opportunity to all? I'm worried that we're at a critical point right now. The legislation, the decisions we make today will have a drastic impact on our community and our generations, not just here, but our family, loved ones, and friends and community living abroad. And that's why it's so important that we vote. It's so important that we have these discussions because we are stronger when we are together.
Yeah, I love that. I think growing up in a place of faith and having those values definitely will align you within our community. And being an immigrant's child as well, you'll understand a lot more of our struggles and the day-to-day life that we choose to live, especially with our parents. Investing everything that they have and pouring that into our lives to make sure that we do better. So it would be really nice to have policies that go hand in hand with the hard work that our parents put in. With that said, why are you a Democrat? Why not a Republican? What values do you see within the Democratic Party that aligns with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I joined the Democratic Party, really because I believe in the values of economic, freedom, making sure that we're supporting our workers and our businesses, when it comes to healthcare, which is extremely important. In this country, you go broke because you get sick, and that shouldn't happen. I talk to immigrants who go back to their home country to get procedure done because it's more cost effective to go back to your home country than to have it here in America. There's a big problem with that. When we think about immigration reform, what are we doing to fix this system? The U.S. was made on immigrants. Our economy, everything, we owe it to the people who came before us and the people who come today. So why are we not reforming a system that so many of us can agree on both sides of the aisle that is so broken? So, to me, being a Democrat is, holding these values of leveling up the playing field, making sure that everybody has a fair chance of achieving the American dream. But I will say, I disagree with some of the Democratic platform. I mean, I'm coming in not coming in with having, everything lined up. I'm very open to saying, you know what, we need reform within the Democratic Party. Especially when it comes to foreign policy, I disagree with the decisions of the administration. I think that's what we need, right? I'm hoping that when you see this, those of you that are watching, you'll see me as a candidate, as a person before my party. I think that in politics today, we've become so polarized. We've become so attached, to our parties. And I think one thing that can help us move forward is when we present ourselves as people, as candidates, and you listen to what I'm saying and to the policies that I'm proposing, which are, some are aligned and some are more independent thinking. That, I believe, is going to be the success of individual, politicians. And that's what's going to help us move forward, when we have people that are willing to stand out and speak up when decisions are not made in the interest of the American people, and they're not made in the interest of foreign policy in our communities living abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with what you're saying about the Democratic Party needing a reform, especially in the last 3-4 years. We've seen the block walkouts and the walk away campaigns that are being put together for people to walk away from the Democratic Party because it no longer represents us, right? And I being one of them, where I felt like this is not a party I want to align myself with, because what is on the platform and what's being executed are completely different things, and I can no longer support it, right? So with that being said, I know Arlington is a blue district, right? The district you're running in. So you guys already have a Democrat running or in seats right now. So you're running against a person that's already has a seat. Why is that necessary? What made you say, I will do a better job, or these are the things that we need to do better that the current elected official is not accomplishing?
Yeah, so our district is all of Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax. We're very blue. In Democratic politics, every district is assigned a number based on the population demographics when it comes to electoral politics. So our district is D+27, which means we're very, very blue, which means that whoever wins the Democratic primary, it has a very good chance, is very likely to win when it comes into November. And that's why it's so important, for us to have these conversations. Why am I running against the current, my opponent, somewhat a Democrat who's been in Congress? Look, I think we need some new ideas. We need fresh blood in there. We need politicians who have a lived experience that parallels voters and everyday people. I think we have too many, millionaires. We have too many people who live a life that is so distant. So how can they represent our needs? How can they legislate on things like housing and the economy and education when they're not attached to it? I think when you have a distance, it creates an opportunity to forget and an opportunity to make decisions that aren't meant for us. What I would bring to the table is the perspective of an immigrant family. I have a professional experience in the technology industry. That is lacking from the halls of Congress today. We don't have leadership that understands technology, yet technology is changing the way that we work. It's changing how we communicate. Social media, all of our information is on social media, yet we have no federal level data privacy laws that keep up with the exponential growth. When we talk about the economy, I've been in the economy, I've been working in the economy. My opponent has not been working in today's economy. So we need legislators that can confront these challenges today and create a path forward. And I also think, back to the initial question, look, when it comes to foreign policy, we need proactive leadership. I know we're going to get to that a little bit later, but just to say the Ethiopian conflict, we saw that coming. Why? It's so, I feel like a lot of the decisions are retroactive when what we need are leadership that is proactive. As someone who is a granddaughter of refugees, I know what war does. I know what the impact is on individual families, on the economy, on the progress that Ethiopia has especially made in the past decade. So what you'll find in me is an ally, someone who's going to be on the forefront confronting these issues, creating a path, and understanding that foreign policy is extremely important because I have family that lives abroad. What happens in America impacts my loved ones, my family, my community abroad. And it's a different fight. it's a different perspective. It's a different fight when you have someone like me in a position of leadership that's able to lead.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you said something that's very dear to my heart, and it's a lack of understanding of technology within Congress. It's terrifying to think. I used to work in the IT industry as well, and data. And what was really terrifying for me was that our regulations were nowhere near what they need to be. And our data is not safe the way it needs to be. People can mine it to use them for however they want to. And when a company merges with another company from Europe, let's say, for example, the standards of Europe is so much higher that some companies are having to hire more people just to make sure that our standards matches, the company's standard matches European standards. And that shows me that our data is not protected. Congress doesn't really know what's going on. Even hearings that we have with Facebook and Twitter and such, the questions they're asking is not what they need to be asking to begin with. And it's really terrifying to know that my personal data is not protected legally the way it needs to.
Absolutely. You know, I remember I was working out in Silicon Valley when Mark Zuckerberg was interviewed by our congressional leadership. And what that hearing showed me was that we had congressional leadership that lacked the fundamental understanding of an industry and of a technology that is rapidly advancing, that is a huge part of the American economy, the American workforce, yet our leadership is so distant from that reality. I mean, does it have to do with the fact that we have a huge elder population in Congress and Senate? Perhaps. Does it have to do with the fact that our system rewards politicians staying in there for decades, staying in there for so long that you become so distant from the everyday life of everyday Americans? I think so. And I think that is a system that we have to break. That's why I'm a huge believer in term limits. We have to create a system where we're engaging new bloods in every single industry that I've worked in. I've worked in the government. I have worked in the private sector. I've worked in nonprofit. New ideas, new perspectives has always been additive. The only place we don't see it is in Congress, where we have people who stay there, for decades. And, I'm so thankful, for those who have served. I thank them for their service, but I also believe that it is time to pass the torch. It is time to move on and usher in a new generation, usher in new ideas, especially, when it comes to our data privacy and legislation that we so urgently need and for which we are very behind compared to other countries.
Yep, absolutely. I think another issue within our community is still censorship, especially with Facebook and Twitter. One being definitely, I think, in one of the hearings that we found out that Congress had something to do with it, or at least the State Department has something to do with it. But along with that as well, it's not just Ethiopian and Eritrean Americans that are getting censored, right? It's everyone that people don't like. If they don't agree with what you say, it seems like you get censored. And one that being, a constitutional issue. Another one, I see it as what you don't know, you fear. And I think what you can't control, you fear. And that fear is mostly driven from the fact that, like we were just saying, they don't really fully understand the technology and how it could benefit people and how it's benefited people. So that tends to drive the policies, or maybe not even policies, the underhanded work that they do when it comes to people saying what they want to say.
I completely agree with you. And, the censorship is a big problem. I mean, one of the, my parents didn't live in democracies. It is a privilege to be able to live in a democracy. And I take that with great pride and responsibility. And one of the things we have to protect is the right to free speech. I mean, this is the foundation of America. It's the foundation of having a free and fair election, free and fair society. So, I'm very concerned with what I'm seeing, in that space. And, look, I think, political discourse is really important. We shouldn't surround ourselves with people that agree with us 100%. When you bring voices and perspectives into your circle that have a different opinion than you, it leads to better discussions. It leads to better outcomes. And the pathway to have that is to make sure that people can speak their truth and speak, their opinion and have these very engaging conversations. So that's another thing. And I think one of the problems that we have is that because we don't have leadership in Congress, you have individual companies that are filling that vacuum with what they believe and what they're defining. And that's a problem. You know, I think that this is when, you know, the government can play a role in creating a standard that all companies can get around. So there's not one individual stakeholder that's making these decisions, but it's, you know, a neutral third party that's ensuring that we're protecting the fundamentals of what makes this country amazing.
Yeah. And I think for me, January 6th, I believe, when the whole ordeal with Trump happened, that was as terrifying to me as the number of people that were being blocked or censored by Twitter, as if Twitter was an elected official that could tell us what to do and what to think. And the fact that people didn't care. They thought it was okay. A lot of people thought it was okay and necessary. And it's really scary to see it, because now we've set a precedent. It feels like that Twitter could basically decide what you could see and what you can't see. Facebook could decide what you can see and what you can't see. And the flow of information has no limitations. It should not have any limitations. And that's definitely a big conversation that we need to have. But along with that, to just kind of, you could add on that if you like, but before we jump onto the policy questions, I guess the big question for us, especially with our community, the Ethiopian American community, in the last year, especially in the last year since the conflict in Ethiopia has started, we have seen policies after policies, mostly driven by Democrats, and especially coming out of the State Department's decisions that are being made by Biden. And instead of even talking to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, he had talked to the President of Kenya, and things that are just around us instead of talking to us directly, not being able to answer the questions that we're asking. And especially because the Ethiopian American community tended to be a heavy Democrat supporter, it feels like there's a distrust that is being built, right? I've heard many people that sworn out from ever voting for a Democrat again because they cannot be trusted. So what do you say to that when people are hurt and feel like they were used to get votes, but no one is willing to hear their concerns?
You know, I feel the same way. You know, part of the reason that I decided to run into this race against another Democrat, against someone who has been, you know, in politics for over 30 years, is because of just that. I'm frustrated as well. I am tired of hearing things and not seeing action tied to that. I'm tired of seeing my community always show up at the polls. When they tell us it's time to vote, we vote. You know, we are there. But what are we getting in return? And I feel like we're not asking for much. We're asking to be at the table. We're asking for our opinions to be heard. We're asking for our needs to be met. And the Ethiopian community has contributed tremendously, not only to the economy of Northern Virginia and my district where I am, to the, you know, our entrepreneur spirit. We are so many incredible Ethiopian Eritrean business owners that have created this vibrant community, the diversity, the restaurants. It's shaped our community. So to me, it's like, this is reciprocal. You know, when we think about government, it has to be reciprocal. And foreign policy, I mean, the U.S. plays a huge role in world global affairs. So what we do, and especially when it comes to the conflict in Ethiopia, it matters, and it affects, you know, our loved ones in our communities abroad. So look, for those of you that are frustrated, I feel you. I'm frustrated too. For those of you who feel like politics has become this, you know, this really complicated and heavy thing, I'm with you. And what I'm doing, I've made this decision to run against another Democrat. I'm running because the Democratic Party needs reform. I am running as a candidate. I'm running as Victoria Virasingh, the daughter of this district, the daughter of our communities, who understands your pain and your struggle and want to carry that with me into Congress, and know that if I make it in there, it'll be because of you. It's not going to be because of the political establishment, because quite frankly, they're not the ones that are, you know, that are actively supporting me. It's you. It's individual people who are sick and tired of the same thing over and over again, who are sick and tired of not being heard, of not being seen, but always showing up when we're called for. We have to change the system, and we can do it together. And we can do it based on policy. We can do it when we come together and we know where our North Star is, which is creating a system that works for all of us, not only here in America, but for our family, our loved ones, our communities living abroad. And know that in me, you will always find an ally. I will be there. I will be listening every step of the way. When I launched this campaign, I brought around members from the Ethiopian Eritrean community, from every community in my district, to inform me of the issues, so that I would always be held up to date and know how, in my position, I could make a difference that would actually help.
I love that. And I think we'll hold you to that if and when you get elected. I know you alluded to it earlier as far as like what really is one of the biggest, local policies, especially immigrants tend to pay attention to, and education is one of them for sure. And I think something that we really appreciate is we want to be able to send our kids where we want to send our kids, right? Being immigrants, most of us are trying to build our lives, so we may not be living in the richest areas. We may not be in school districts that are very good, right? I used to live in a place where the high school was ranked 9 out of 10, and literally 15 minutes down the road, it was ranked 2 out of 10. And parents cannot send their kids to these schools. And there's always that promise of, we're going to do better, right? The schools are going to get better. And I've gone to high school in this country, middle school in this country, and that's been the same promise over and over again. And in the meantime, the ones that we're really being affected are low-income, poor folks, brown and black kids, right? So how do you propose that we fix this issue, especially when it comes to education? Because when we don't get educated the way we need to, we don't get to the right colleges that we want to get to, or we don't get to the majors that we want to get to. And that really does put a not only economical, but really emotional dent into who we are and what we want to become.
That's a great question. Education for me was such a huge transformational opportunity. I mean, education was my pathway from, working class, struggling to get by, to becoming educated, working in the workforce, being able to support my family. So when I talk to voters across the district, this is brought up all the time. And I just want to preface this by saying, a lot of education policy is made at the state level and at the local level. That's not to say that we still can't help, at the federal level. And the question is, what can we do? And I draw upon, my own experience. So I was educated. I went to a Catholic school, growing up. We were given a scholarship opportunity. When my mom, first came to this country, she was alone. She didn't know the language, and she was based in her faith, and her faith took her to church, and that community welcomed her. And then when it was time for me to go to school, we had been so invested in that community that they, helped me. We didn't have the financial means, but they helped me study there. So I get it, school and having a community in school that is rewarding and around you is so important. When I came back to Virginia, I was at a school engaging with families. I was at Barcroft Elementary School in South Arlington. We have a huge immigrant population there. And I saw firsthand, what it's like today. And, I think in our district, we've got amazing schools. We've got a lot of resources. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that all of the schools are equal. I think you made a really good point. I mean, you could be in a school and 2 miles away, it's different. But what I feel like is happening, a lot of education policy is made for the adults in the room. A lot of the education is made to serve the adults. And what I think that we need to move towards is making policy decisions for the kids. What is in the best interest for our kids? When we realize that that is the North Star, that is who we're fighting for, that is who I'm running for, then we're going to see, decisions change to meet the needs of the community, and understanding that our community, is here, and our kids want to work hard. They're in the schools they want. It's our responsibility to give them the opportunity to do so. And education is such a stability mechanism. It is a way to bring families from working class to middle class, from middle class, up into, professional class. And that is something that I would, always strive to do. And something else that I've been hearing a lot is mental health services within our school district. The pandemic has been so tough for our students, our staff, and our teachers. So I'm proposing federal funds given to mental health services in our schools for kids our students, our teachers, and our staff to help make sure that we're addressing every need that a student coming in might feel, and as well as for our educators and our staff that are assisting in that process.
Yeah. So what do you say to those that say each student is assigned the same amount of money federally, right, as a student, but not each student is getting equal opportunity as far as education goes? So what do you say to those that say the Democratic Party works for the school, the teacher union more than to the students, because voucher system may work, and that's only other alternative that we've seen as far as education goes, especially making sure that each student has the opportunity and the choice of school that they could go to? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that that I saw intimately, when I was working within the school systems. Like, I think we all want the same thing, right? We all want to have, thriving schools that support our kids and support a wide variety of kids. To me, when I think about schools in our district, it's so tied to housing, right? Where you live determines the school district that you go to. And in our district, it's gotten so expensive to own a home. When I was growing up, my parents on minimum wage bought a tiny townhome in North Arlington. And that, we left our family that was in South Arlington, and that's where we began to live. But today, that would be impossible. I mean, today, when I was growing up, teachers, policemen, firemen, federal contract workers, they were moving in. Today, they're moving out. So when I think about that issue that you said, I mean, we can't address it without addressing this huge elephant in the room, which is housing. I mean, how are we allowing a pathway to home ownership? How are we giving families an opportunity to thrive in our community when we don't have that? I think a big problem is the corporate interests and the developers that come in and make decisions. And to be honest, it's also archaic zoning policies that benefit the wealthy and do not create opportunities for anybody else. And they're keeping, this control. But what we should be doing is expanding out. We should be building more. We should be reforming zoning policies. We should be investing in community land trust, which puts more power into communities. And I think that's where we're going to, especially in our district, right? That's number one issue. That's where we're going to start to see advances. I just talked to a mom yesterday. She was living in an apartment building in a neighborhood where there was a lot of violence. And she's like, I just don't want that. I feel unsafe here, and I want the best for my child, And so she had to move out, relocate her whole thing, and she had the means to. But what if you don't have the means to? Your outcome in life should not be determined on your family's ability to buy a home.
And I think that's the part that really sucks about the educational system we have right now and the policies around it, because I feel like it's the fastest way to keep poor people poor. If you're not giving them the opportunity they need to get out of the situation they are in right now, the way we could do that is education, right? Unless you're an exceptional child that could study for yourself and stay focused, which are very rare, right? A lot of us need help. We need supporting school. We need supporting teachers around us, where it seems like poor people don't have that at all. And that tends to be, so that just tends to keep especially Black and brown kids poor for generations after generation, because they can't choose a school they go to. They can't afford to go to the communities that they need to go to buy a house, right? Because like you said, it's really difficult, especially now when we have corporations walking in and buying lands after land and building luxury apartments on it or luxury homes in it where people can't afford to live in.
I don't know if you heard about this, but I just had last month, there were some housing developers in Tacoma, Maryland, who they came in and they cut down all these old trees, 100-year-old protected trees, in order to develop. And they did it because it was easier and cheaper to pay the fine than it would have been to work around the area. Yeah. I mean, therein lies the problem, is that I think we have an economy, we have a system that benefits this sort of situation. It benefits corporations, corporate developers for their own interests and not for the people. And the reason why we have that, and the reason why the politicians don't stand up, is because they take money from these corporations and these developers. You know, when I launched this campaign, I said, if I want to see change in government, it has to start with me. So I decided I'm not going to take any money from any corporations or no corporations. We're funded only by individual people in our churches, because that's how it should start. Because it starts with who's at your dinner table, who's calling you on the phone. Because who's calling me is Desta, who's calling me is Daniel, it's Maria, it's Ahmed. These are people who I've gotten to know who are supporting me in this campaign. And that is the only way that we're going to move forward when we really transform the system from within. And that is why, you know, I think we have to talk about these issues, because we can't keep sugarcoating them and thinking that it's just going to go away. I think what it requires is someone who's brave enough to confront this and to change the way that we do things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we move on to some of my questions on foreign policies, our viewer is asking, I guess, more suggestions. So I want you to comment on it. Cut taxes and stop identity politics. How do you feel about taxes, especially how much the middle class is paying right now, and Democrats being known to add taxes in overall looks, if we're looking at it just on average, and the whole identity politics that seems to drive politics as opposed to genuine policies. There's one incident recently when a justice retired. President Biden came out and say, we're going to fill that spot by a Black woman, right? More power to him, but I think qualifications should come before identity politics, and you can't appease us by, or at least don't try to appease women and Black folks by just saying, this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to, just fill this spot. And it just felt very weird and awkward, as most identity politics that the White House tends to do. I remember a while ago when we had the Robin Hood incident, and who's going to investigate it? The person that was investigating it within Biden administration was someone that was hired by Robin Hood to come and make a speech, I guess, a year prior. And they were being asked about her integrity. And the answer was given, I remember very distinctly, was, oh, she's a successful woman. It was just weird for me, because that has nothing to do whether or not I should trust her integrity, right? So how do you look at the identity politics we have right now in politics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you so much for the viewer who offered this question. So let's talk about taxes. Let's talk about the fact that the wealthy 1%, that are the wealthiest corporations, pay $0 in federal taxes, yet the middle class and the working class pay their fair share. Is that fair? I don't think so. Let's talk about the fact that that our tax system is not fair. We need to create a system where people pay, in their fair share. A big part of my platform is helping small businesses. Small businesses have been hurt by the pandemic, yet they've had to pay taxes on their PPP loans. They have a tremendous tax burden, which doesn't help a lot of our small businesses in our community just thrive in the community. So look, I believe that we need we need to hold our corporations, we need to hold everybody to a fair level. We're not asking anybody to pay more than their fair share. We're just asking everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everybody in our community, to pay into the system. And when it comes to identity politics, the second part of this question, I think that, we have, unfortunately, in politics, there's a lot of identity politics that drives a lot of the conversation and the media around this. The best way that what I can offer is I can come to you and say, listen, here are my policies. This is why I'm running. This is what I plan to do. This is how I hope to shape the future. Some of those come from my lived experience, right? It comes from me understanding what it's like to receive Pell Grants to go to college, understand having a mom that worked minimum wage jobs. It comes from seeing my parents in my community go through the naturalization process and immigration. So those experiences just come because of where I was born. But I believe more than anything, those lived experiences shape my policies. It shaped the way that I will lead because I understand, because I have a firsthand experience. And let's talk about those issues. Let's celebrate them, and let's bring a variety of lived experiences to the table, because that is going to benefit all of us.
I see that. I see that argument for sure, and I relate to it to a certain degree. But if, for example, right, if a woman of color, someone that looks like me, maybe even Ethiopian American, sits in a table, but doesn't represent the issues that I care about, right? Looking at one example is our vice president, and how a lot of people are really excited. Like, we have our first vice president that happened to be a woman. For me, that's great. That's great for the kids, right? To look up to her. That's great for kids to say, yes, I could achieve these high places. But really, for me, I didn't think she was a great candidate, right? As far as the work that she's done as a senator and as an attorney in California, right? There are some issues with policy, especially with criminal justice, that was such a red flag for me. And it was really strange how we could just look over that just because she looks like me, right? So how do we make sure that not only does someone looks like me, but the fact that that person looks like me or not shouldn't matter, as long as a candidate could understand what I'm going through, right? You don't need to be Ethiopian to know what my issues are, right? Ethiopian American to know what my issues are. You don't need to be an immigrant to understand and have compassion, really figure out what my issues are. And how do we move away from you look like me so you could get in office and I'll just by default trust you to represent me, versus every single candidate, regardless of color, race, or gender, whatever other identities we put on them, we develop that sense of trust in the conversations that we have.
I think trust, that is a big word that we need to use more when it comes to politics and building relationships between our community and our elected officials. So it's about listening to what people are telling you are their policies, listening to tell you what their priorities are, and seeing if their priorities match their action, and seeing what they are doing to truly, benefit the community that we all live in. I think this is the way that we get away from politics as usual, and we move into the politics of the future, and politics that works for everyday people. It's when you listen to the policies and you inform what the issues are and create a plan to fix them and to change them, and to be ahead of the issue, being proactive on what the issues are going to be and how to shape them, rather than being reactive, which I find is a lot of. Look, I think there's a lot of putting your finger in the air and you see where the wind blows. And for politicians who do that, we call that political evolution. But real change, real systemic change that we need, not only for our communities here, but for our communities abroad who are suffering, we need politicians and leaders who are willing to make the wind. And the way that you do that is you come from your grassroots, you talk about the issues that matter, and you bring people along with you.
So does it bother you that there's a lot of identity politics within the political environment of this country? And do you see that as dangerous, or is it useful?
Well, I think what identity politics is trying to do is it's trying to relate. If you think about what politicians do, politicians and the way that we present our issues is all about relatability, right? We're trying to relate our policies to the lives of Americans. And when we say this is going to benefit the American people, it's because you're hoping that you're promoting a policy that you believe relates to the day-to-day life of American people. So, I can see where having an affinity, but you have a shared identity, can create some trust in that. What I like to say, and what I believe is really important, what we're doing on the campaign, is we're talking about how lived experience shapes your policies. We're talking about how when you've benefited from a government assistance program, when you have participated in an immigration application process. It gives you a perspective of understanding how policy impacts everyday life. It gives you an understanding of how to shape policy in a way that will benefit everyday people, that will actually impact the people for whom the policy is meant for. So let's talk about relatability, let's talk about experience, and let's bring it back to these central issues of housing, of the economy. Let's bring it back to education. Let's bring it back to healthcare. Let's bring it back to immigration reform and climate change. I mean, this is the only way that we are going to move forward as a nation. And, I do believe it is important. I mean, I'll speak from my own personal experience. When I was growing up, I did not see a lot of people that looked like me. So I didn't think it was possible for me to go to college. I didn't think it was possible for me to work in the tech industry. But I did that. And then slowly, as we started moving along, and I saw, and it wasn't people who, it was people who shared my lived experience. And like, I loved how you were mentioning, you don't have to come from the same community to understand what the issues are, but it is our responsibility to educate. It's our responsibility to speak. And it's on the part of the politicians to listen and to take what they're hearing and transform that into policies that will actually change things. And I think one of the frustrating things that I feel in politics is that it's always the same people. We are long waiting for the changes that we need from the same people, and it's not working, which is why I think we need new ideas. We need a fresh perspective, fresh eyes to go in there and say, look, just because this is always the way that things have been does not mean that this is how things have to be or how they should be in order for us to move forward.
Yeah. And I think it's getting to that point where people are waking up, right? This dabbling into people's identity as a way to get emotional reaction out of them. At least that's how I see it. For me to always be told you're a Black woman, right? That poking at that identity as if that's the only thing that matters to me, right? Those are the only interests that I have. And I think that goes along with, the critical race theory that some schools or some states are trying to enforce, trying to teach kids at a very, very young how oppressed they are, how the society they live in basically hates them, and how no matter what they do, because they're Black or because they're a woman, it's difficult for them to navigate the world. And teaching that at such a young age is, I think, for me, is very dangerous. And that reaction also something that we've seen in Virginia governor election, when that became one of the main issues within the election, within the campaign. So I think people are, at least me and some of my friends and people around me, are really tired of being told how I should react or who I should support, and how the Democrats are, for the Black folks, or the Republicans hate Black people. That very something that drives just my emotions necessarily to get into that place where it makes me feel unsafe and unloved, as opposed to policies that I should really care about. And I think that's where the question is coming from, and something that we've talked in length on this channel about how do we navigate the fact that, yes, we are people of color, but how do we make sure that we move away from that? It's not necessarily to say we're not Black, but necessarily to say what other issues matters to me more than the fact that I'm Black and I'm a woman. So that's where the question is coming from.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And, each individual, when I talk to voters, right, voters are not monolithic. How we feel, how we see policy is shaped by where we have grown up, the environment that we've grown up in, the industry that we work in, who we surround ourselves with. And I think to classify, someone as this type of voter because of X, Y, and Z just doesn't fit the paradigm of today. I think, political pundits and political strategists are always looking for ways, to simplify things and to better understand the political landscape. But I see, we're living in a post-pandemic world. We're still navigating, some of the viruses, but voters have changed. I mean, I talk to voters every single day. What voters want and how voters are perceiving their politicians and their external world has completely changed. And there's a lot of people who don't fit. I would say most people that I talk to don't fit neatly into a box, and I don't either. I mean, people are going to try and put me into a box and classify me as this this type of candidate. But the reality is that, my positions come from a lived experience. My positions come from a professional experience. I'm looking out for the interests and the best of the American people, of the Virginians, of Virginia's 8th district. That is where I derive, my policies from. And I think that's what I hope to see in politics, is moving away, from this, boxed in, analogies and these boxed in labels, and towards a system which really looks at the voters and looks at candidates more holistically.
I love that. And I think that's all we want from our candidates and elected officials, to really look at us and talk to us and really figure out what concerns are, as opposed to, just marking us off as, oh, this is the identity they belong in, and these are the things they should care about, right? Can we jump into some questions I have for you about foreign policies now?
Sure.
What do you feel about sanctions?
So, I think that sanctions are a foreign policy tool that's used to help solve a conflict, right? Sanctions typically are used to reduce the impact of war or further escalation, violence, and conflict. I'll just come out and say I believe that the sanctions imposed on Ethiopia benefits nobody. It does not benefit the Ethiopian people. It does not benefit our community, the diaspora living here in America, here in Virginia. I believe that of taking Ethiopia out of AGOA was a terrible decision. And the first thing, I would do if elected was work to reinstate Ethiopia in AGOA. I remember, seeing so much of the growth in Ethiopia, the economic growth, the entrepreneurship. It was such an exciting time, and this conflict has really devastated a lot of that opportunity that was growing in Ethiopia and Eritrea. So I believe that, the sanctions that have been imposed in Ethiopia have not served to benefit the Ethiopian people.
Yeah. So I think at the beginning you said sanctions will help end conflicts.
So in general, the belief, right? We're looking at it in Russia as well, right? The use of sanctions as a foreign policy tool to help alleviate the progression of further violence and war is what it's used for. And I think when it comes, when it comes to Ethiopia, the sanctions did not serve to benefit the Ethiopian people, did not serve to end the conflict. I disagree with pulling Ethiopia out of AGOA. I don't think that these foreign policy decisions benefited the people that I believe perhaps that we should be most focused on. And I disagree with a lot of the current administration's take and their actions in regard to the sanctions in Ethiopia.
Yeah, and I think some of the frustration as well as Americans is, when is it enough, right? One, what gives us as Americans to say this is how you should run a country, and especially when we've seen time and time again, there's not been a place, you could correct me if I'm mistaken, that sanction has helped, right? It has hurt the poor of those countries that we're trying to pass these sanctions on. We've seen it in Venezuela, we're seeing it in Haiti, we've seen it in Syria, Algeria, Libya, and now in Afghanistan as well, where the poor are the ones that are being affected, right? Because the ones that are causing conflicts are not going to be the ones that are going to go without food or without money for transportation or without gas, right? They will just continue to accumulate this wealth away from the poorest of the poor. So when do we say, let's figure out a different way to handle these conflicts without hurting the people that are already being affected, or the sanction has ever helped in a way that we mean it to help?
Yes, I think that one of the things that we could have done is be more proactive in engaging our stakeholders in diplomatic relationships with other countries, including Ethiopia. You know, I have seen this happen in so many different countries, especially in Central and South America, as well as in Africa. You know, what are we doing to really engage diplomatically to create these alliances with our allies rather than push them further away because we haven't done the work that we need to? You know, I believe that I strongly believe that in the role of diplomacy, diplomacy does not dictate that you agree with the government. I mean, we need to engage diplomatically on every front with every country because it matters. It matters to have these relationships, especially when you have red flags coming, especially to avoid and to do everything we can in proactive manner before a situation, a conflict escalates.
Yeah. I apologize. So along with that, I think another thing that we're really concerned about right now is Ethiopia being, the main thing that we're looking at. We're finding that the Biden administration, along with some congressional Democrats, seem like they're aligning themselves with the entity within Ethiopia that's causing this war to continue, right? And there's this selective way of condemning one act and ignoring the other one completely. And there's this demand after demand after demand that's being put on the government of Ethiopia, which is completely negating the crimes that this armed insurgent has been causing in Ethiopia for the last 30 years, right? So no matter what kind of sanction we put in place to make sure that this conflict stops, there's no guarantee in doing so, especially because it tends to isolate those that are victims and ignore the war or the war crimes that are being committed against these folks. Also, the fact that this could go on for the next 10 years, right? The HR 6600 that we're trying to pass. So if elected into Congress, what would you do about this draft bill that is currently been written and been debated within Congress?
So I think as it's written, HR 6600 does not address the needs of the conflict. I believe it undermines the peace effort by Ethiopians and the Ethiopian government and threatens to impose further sanctions on Ethiopia. What would this do? As I looked at this bill, it would suspend security assistance, which would further weaken Ethiopia and further establish instability in the Horn of Africa. Financially revoking economical development opportunities through loans, financial gains, and technical assistance. This would insist on allies, bill would insist for allies and nations to further this financial blockade, which would limit and or restrict aid in Ethiopia. When it comes to investment, this bill would prohibit Ethiopia from the United States International Development Financial corporations, thereby preventing U.S. investments and currency exchange in Ethiopia. So, and a basic right, the bill denies basic Ethiopian American mobility to invest, and it would penalize the Ethiopian diaspora and allies of Ethiopia for supporting the people of Ethiopia. So when we talk about moving forward and ending, this terrible conflict and ending the deaths and restoring peace and stability and building on the success that Ethiopia has amassed, especially before the pandemic, I mean, we need to really talk about solutions that are going to work, solutions that are really going to further this long. And I worry that, we're not, from all of my conversations with Ethiopian leaders, they feel unseen and unheard. They feel like they're not being listened to. And I've done everything I can to listen, to listen to the needs. And by the way, not only of our African, our Ethiopian, Eritrean diaspora here, but also those living abroad. As I have family that lives abroad, I spend a lot of time on WhatsApp engaging with other communities. And, I think it's so important to have that connection. And I'm very interested in, supporting peace efforts and moving towards a post-war stability in Ethiopia and doing everything that I can to listen to the community members, to listen to our leaders who are also invested in promoting peace and stability in the region.
So why do you think it's important, or I guess it's the responsibility of the United States government to help solve a conflict so far away from its borders, especially when not invited in as a mediator in this conflict, right? Because the U.S. government, what they're doing right now in Ethiopia and other conflicts is forcing themselves in and making themselves irrelevant within that conflict and deciding who should win and who should stop this and not stop that, right? And it feels like there's already an entity that should watch out for these issues. We have the UN, right? That's the responsibility of the UN. Why is it up to the United States to take these individual internal conflicts within sovereign nations to take that responsibility upon themselves and dictate the terms of peace?
Well, I think it should be, we should come in as a reinforcement to the effort. I don't believe that we, should meddle. We shouldn't be leading those discussions. This is the responsibility. This is a time where the U.S. needs to rely on our allies. We need to listen to those who are leading the effort. We need to listen to those who are been engaged in the conflict, who have been engaged in the policies and the politics. When we mentioned that the efforts previous to date, I believe those have further destabilized Ethiopia and has created further conflict. When I think that should never happen. They should have stayed out of it. That was not our place. And now we are in the situation, and obviously, as a granddaughter of refugees, the impact of foreign policy affected my family. It affected how we were able to begin life again. So to the extent that we can help with humanitarian aid for the people of Ethiopia, absolutely. The United States gives humanitarian aid to a number of different countries. So that's one thing that I'm very keen in supporting. How can we continue to support the Ethiopian people and build diplomatic relationships so that we are informed and understand and take our cues and build alliances so that we are cooperating and we are being helpful and we're actually doing things that work and serve the people of Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. One of the things I'm really invested in is promoting economic growth within the Horn of Africa. If elected, I would love to call, we have summits in Europe. We have summits in Central and South America. We should have, a summit with the Horn of Africa promoting trade and alliance building, promoting economic growth and social development, promoting entrepreneurship. These are tools at our disposal that I believe are underutilized and something that I would be proactive in leading if elected.
I think I have just a comment on that. When you're not of equal footing, right? When you have a powerful government and a very rich, powerful government like the United States, calling summits of mostly poorer countries that are working on improving their day-to-day livelihood, right? It doesn't feel like they're on equal footing to have any kind of negotiation per se without giving up a lot, or without feeling like they're being bullied. So how do we make sure that these conversations, as we're trying to help or trying to assist a lot of the countries that you're mentioning or the regions you're mentioning, how do we make sure that we're not bullying them into submission for political reasons, as opposed to make sure that we have the interests of the people of the United States? Of course, that's who you guys are going to be working for when you get elected, but also making sure that we're not taking advantage of, at least politically, in other countries, making sure that we're not choosing, hand-selecting leaders and such, that as we've seen in a lot of other countries that have been happening in the last few years, at least a few decades, in my memory only.
Yeah, well, this is a place where we listen, where we follow. This is a situation where I believe we rely on our allies and on the people who are leading, and we come in as an assistance, right? We come in offering, the resources that we have available, for a summit like this, where we offer, a perspective, where we offer, engage, bringing multiple stakeholders to the table. I mean, I think that there is definitely, I believe there is a role for us, a very important role for us to play, but it has to be one that is one that we are invited to. It is one where we are supporting the efforts. And when I spoke of this recommendation, it's because, you know, I believe that we need to, I as an individual and as a candidate and hopefully as an elected official, you know, I'm very interested in promoting economic and social growth in developing countries. You know, my family comes from Asia and South America. I understand, you know, what that impact is like, and anything that we can do. I mean, our economy is interconnected, right? Our social media, our economy, our trade, the ways in which we conduct business, it's interconnected. So that's why it's important for us to have these conversations, to have these meetings, so that we can continue working together in a multinational and in a global economy to advance, you know, the rights and promote economic and social growth, you know, where it is. And, you know, a lot of time I've been to a few of these. I mean, just the networking component, right? I mean, you know, as well as I do, right? The more people that you know, the more conversations you have, the more you listen and you find opportunities to work together. You know, that's been my role when I've worked in the private sector, of creating these alliances, of creating the space, right? It's opening up the space for these alliances, for these business relationships, for these opportunities to come. And that is what I'd be really interested in doing to help, you know, promote this, not just, you know, here in America, but also our global economy.
Absolutely. And I think on that topic, I really like to appreciate you for all the work that you've done in creating that bridge that we need within our community, right? I know last week you had a discussion with a lot of the Ethiopian American and Eritrean American leaders. We're able to sit down and have that conversation with them, as you have just mentioned. So how, I know that as we talked earlier, there's already an incumbent Democrat that is going to be maybe running for office again, right? They haven't said they were going to run. So you are running for the primaries.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about the rules of primaries in your district? I know in my district, you have to be a registered Democrat to vote in the primaries of the Democratic primaries. Is that the same in your district? And how can people come out and support you if you're their candidates?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been such a great conversation. Yes, last week we had an amazing event at Makda in Alexandria, Virginia, where both myself and the congressman gave some remarks, and we engaged with stakeholders. It was a wonderful event. So in Virginia, we have open primaries. So what that means is that anybody can vote in a primary. So you have to choose if you want to vote in the Republican or Democratic primary, but you can go in. The election day is June 21st, but early voting is starting in May. And here's what I will leave you with. You know, this district is D plus 27. So that means that we're probably 76, 77% Democratic. So typically in districts like ours, whoever wins the Democratic primary will have a very good chance of winning in November, just because of the data around the Democratic and Republican line. I'm sorry for those Republicans that are listening, but here is your opportunity. We haven't had a primary since 2014. We haven't had a choice. This year, you have a choice. You have two options on the ballot for the Democratic primary. And I hope that in me, you will find a candidate, somebody who comes from me, somebody who is eager to listen every single day to the needs of the Ethiopian and Eritrean community and for the greater African diaspora living in our region. As the daughter of immigrants, I say that because it is an experience that I believe has shaped how I have led my life. It has shaped my perspective, and it will continue to shape the policies that I enact and the conversations that I have and the issues that I will advocate for as a congresswoman of Virginia's 8th district. And to learn more about our campaign and our policies and more events that we're holding, you can visit victoriaforcongress.com. And I have some parting words, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Sime Victoria Virasingh now, Tispachahun Agadwin, Enam Abrin, Enashnafalen. Exabdier Yabarkachu.
Wow, I love it. I was not expecting that. Thank you for learning that. It really does show that you've been in the community for a while. I guess you said your last words, and just to add on this, I know some of our viewers were asking which district you're part of is one thing, and then which church you attend was another question that I saw. If
Sure.
you don't mind sharing that as well, it would be nice.
Sure.
I think there might be from Virginia.
No problem. So the district is all of Arlington, it's all of Alexandria, Falls Church City, and a big chunk of Fairfax. So if you're in Lake Barcroft, Bailey's Crossroads, Seven Corners, Mount Vernon, a part of Springfield, a little bit of McLean as well. If you go onto our website, there's on the campaign tab, there's a map of the district, and you can type in your address and you can see if you're in there. So I would invite all of you who are listening to go onto the website and you can see exactly where the district lines are. And the church that I'm a part of and that I grew up in is called St. Agnes Church, and it's in Arlington. And it's a lovely community, and I'm very grateful for all the support that community has extended to me. And it's been a huge influence in who I've become and the values that I hold and my belief in God and a greater, and the faith that allows me to keep moving forward and to be optimistic about the future and know that we are stronger when we come together.
I love that. And just one more question. I know some candidates that are currently signing a term limits agreements with their constituents. Is that something that you're willing to look into, or not yet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have said from the beginning, look, I am a big proponent of term limits. I think term limits and campaign finance reform will help transform our electoral process, which is very difficult for people like me to get into. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of what it's like. So right now, in order to get on the ballot, I have to collect 1,000 signatures just to be put on the ballot. Every candidate has to do this. So in order to file this, the fee is $3,000, $480 just to file. To get the platform, which allows me to know which doors to knock, who's in my district, which voters I can call, that cost me almost $8,000. So just to be able to run, you're off the bat, here are the fees, which are so preventative of allowing everyday people. It means that you have to have money to do this, which is another, plug that I'll put. We're a completely grassroots campaign. I'm not taking any corporate money, no developer money. It's just individual people. So if you believe in what I stand for, if you want to see, our policies and our issues come to the light of day and have, some money that you want to donate to us, it's on the website. Feel free to go there. And that's also why I'm a big proponent of term limits, because I believe that'll start ending the system. I want to go in, I want to serve my community. I want to serve the community that raised me. And then I want to finish my term and I want to pass on the torch to the next person. That's when we're going to start to have a system of voices that come to the table, and you have the incentives are different when you have term limits. And I'm a huge proponent of them. I am excited if I'm elected. I would love to pass that legislation. I'd love to be a part of that movement. And if I also want to hear from you, for the listeners that are listening, send us an email. It's info@victoriaforcongress.com. If you want to send us a WhatsApp or a text message, the phone number is 703-677-1875. Feel free to call or to text or to give me an email. This is the only way that I'm going to hear from you, that I'm going to hear what matters to you and how I can make a difference once elected.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being here. If you have any last words, I'll give you the floor.
That's it. I just want to say, I'm so grateful, and it's a privilege to be here in front of you running for U.S. Congress. It's the American dream. I think my story is the American dream. We all have that American dream. And I want to thank you for tuning in, for listening to this aspiring Congresswoman from the state of Virginia, from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you, and Exabier Yebarkachu.
Thank you. And this is definitely the beauty of this country, the ability for anyone, for the most part, to be able to run for office and represent their community. That I'm very thankful to live in this country, for one of the reasons that I'm thankful to be here. And thank you so much for all our viewers that participated in this conversation, have stayed with us for as long as you have. As we will continue, we promise to bring you multiple candidates from other states as well, as we've done in the past, coming up to the 2022 midterm elections, and be able to follow the different issues that we do care about, foreign and domestic as well. And we really appreciate you for being here with us. Have a wonderful time until we meet again. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.